This video is a story games tier list based on my own experience. I'm ranking these games by how their stories felt while playing, not by reviews or popularity. Some focus on strong writing, others on characters or player choices. Each tier reflects how memorable the story was for me, so let's dive right into it. Uncharted 4: A Thief's End is a story that felt more mature to me than the earlier games. Instead of just chasing treasure, I felt like I was following Nathan Drake at a point where his past starts to collide with the quiet life he wants. The game takes time to focus on relationships, especially between Nate, Elena, and Sam, and a lot of the emotion comes from small conversations rather than big action scenes. Even though the final part of the story goes on longer than it needs to, the ending still feels meaningful and reflective. As a character-driven farewell that mostly sticks the landing, this is why I see Uncharted 4 sitting in the great tier for story. Shadow of the Colossus is an experience that stayed with me because of how little it explains and how much it makes me feel. I felt alone most of the time, moving through empty lands and slowly realizing that every action I took had a cost. The game never tells me what to think, but through silence, music, and scale, it quietly builds doubt about whether my goal is the right one. By the end, that weight becomes impossible to ignore, and the final moments hit harder because of how restrained everything has been. This lasting emotional impact is why Shadow of the Colossus firmly belongs in the masterpiece tier for me. Detroit Become Human constantly made me stop and think about the decisions I was making and who they were affecting. Playing as different androids gave me very different emotional angles, from quiet, personal moments to tense standoffs where one choice could change everything. I appreciated how my actions shaped relationships and outcomes, even if the writing sometimes felt heavy-handed and too eager to explain its themes out loud. The strong performances and branching paths kept me invested, and I often felt uneasy choosing badly just to see the result. With that level of choice-driven impact, despite its rough edges, Detroit Become Human sits in the good tier for me. A Plague Tale series felt like one long and draining journey for me, told across A Plague Tale Innocence and A Plague Tale Requiem. In Innocence, I spent most of my time feeling fragile, guiding Amicia and Hugo through a world that looks terrifying but often feels more guided than it first appears, with stealth and rat sections that support the mood even when they don't push me very hard. In Requiem, everything turns darker and heavier, with much larger rat swarms, harsher moments, and an older Amicia who feels worn down by constant loss and pressure. While the gameplay itself doesn't evolve as much as I hoped across both parts, the atmosphere, performances, and emotional weight steadily build and carry the experience forward. Taken together, the impact comes more from tone and character bonds than challenge, which is why A Plague Tale series lands in the good tier for me. Spec Ops: The Line stayed with me because it slowly turns a familiar military setup into something deeply uncomfortable. As Captain Walker, I felt myself changing alongside him, starting with good intentions and ending up questioning almost every action I took. The game doesn't give clear right or wrong answers, and that made every violent moment feel heavier instead of exciting. I liked how it uses familiar shooter mechanics to make me reflect on what I was doing, even when the combat itself felt rough or inconsistent at times. By the end, I wasn't thinking about winning or losing, but about the cost of pushing forward when I should have stopped. That lasting impact and willingness to challenge the player is why Spec Ops: The Line earns an excellent place on my tier list. The Last of Us Part 1 is an experience that hit me hard because of how grounded and human everything feels from start to finish. Playing as Joel and traveling with Ellie, I felt the tension of survival mixed with quiet moments that let their bond grow naturally over time. The world is brutal and unforgiving, but it's those small conversations, pauses, and choices along the way that stayed with me the most. Even after knowing what happens, revisiting it in this version reminded me how carefully every moment is paced and how powerful restraint can be. The emotional weight never feels forced, and the ending still left me sitting in silence, which is why The Last of Us Part 1 clearly belongs in the masterpiece tier for me. Metro Exodus felt like a slower and more thoughtful journey compared to most shooters I've played. I liked how it moved away from tight tunnels and gave me wider spaces to explore, while still keeping tension high through limited resources and constant danger. Traveling with Artyom and the crew on the train made the experience feel more personal, especially during the quiet moments between missions. Even though the ending didn't hit as hard as the build-up and some choices weren't always clear, the atmosphere and sense of survival stayed strong throughout. Because of that balance of immersion and restraint, it earns a good spot on my tier list. Firewatch offered a quiet, personal escape that relied more on mood and conversation than action. Spending time alone in the Wyoming wilderness as Henry, I became absorbed in long walks, simple tasks, and radio chats that slowly revealed who these people were beneath their humor and defenses. The environment came across as real and lived in, and the writing made even small exchanges matter, especially as tension and unease began to build. While the ending didn't fully land the way I expected, it stayed with me because it left room for reflection rather than clear answers. For its atmosphere, performances, and emotional restraint, this sits in the good tier for me. God of War shows a very different side of Kratos, and that shift is what stood out to me the most. Traveling with Atreus turns the journey into something more personal, where quiet conversations matter just as much as the big fights. I liked how Kratos struggles to be a father while facing his past, and how that tension slowly changes the way he treats his son. The Norse world gives room to breathe, explore, and reflect, while combat stays heavy and deliberate, making every encounter feel earned. The emotional growth carries all the way through, and because of how well everything comes together, this comfortably earns an excellent place on my tier list. Horizon Zero Dawn stands out to me because of how confidently it drops you into a strange future and lets curiosity do the work. Playing as Aloy, I was constantly driven by questions about the world, the machines, and where everything came from, even when the dialogue occasionally stumbled. Combat against the mechanical creatures stayed engaging thanks to smart design and the freedom to approach fights in different ways, while exploration rewarded patience and observation. Some side activities blurred together over time, but the core journey remained strong and purposeful. For its ambition and satisfying progression, this earns a great place on my tier list. Red Dead Redemption 2 left a deep impression on me because of how carefully it builds its world and characters over time. Playing as Arthur Morgan, I experienced a slow and deliberate life on the edge of a changing America, where loyalty, doubt, and consequences quietly pile up. The pace asks for patience, but in return it gives small human moments that made the camp, the gang, and the land around them feel alive even when nothing dramatic was happening. I appreciated how the game lets silence, routine, and observation carry as much weight as gunfights and big missions. By the end, the emotional impact came from living with these people rather than rushing toward a conclusion, which is why this earns a place in the masterpiece tier for me. Life is Strange Remastered brings me back to Arcadia Bay and the bond between Max and Chloe, which remains the strongest part of the experience. I still cared deeply about the characters and their conversations, and the emotional moments hit just as hard as before. The rewind ability encourages experimentation and removes fear from making choices, which made interactions more engaging for me. That said, the remastered version is uneven, with visual upgrades that don't apply everywhere and technical issues that break immersion, especially compared to the originals. Even with those problems, the writing and characters carry the experience, and that lasting connection is why this lands in the great tier for me. The Wolf Among Us places you in a dark, twisted version of New York where fairy tale characters live broken, messy lives, and playing as Bigby Wolf made every decision feel heavy. I liked how conversations often turned tense without warning, forcing me to choose between restraint and brutality, knowing people would remember it. The noir tone, sharp writing, and distinctive art style gave the world a strong identity that stayed consistent across all episodes, even when pacing dipped slightly in the middle. By the end, the consequences of my actions mattered more than solving the mystery itself, and that sense of accountability lingered. Because of its atmosphere, characters, and impactful choices, this earns a great spot on my tier list. Star Wars Jedi Survivor disappointed me more than I expected, mainly because the technical problems kept getting in the way of enjoying what it tries to do. The combat and movement have more options than before, but frequent frame drops, bugs, and uneven performance made fights frustrating instead of exciting, especially during tougher encounters. Exploration looks impressive on paper, yet the large maps often felt cluttered and tiring to move through, even with fast travel added. When a game this big struggles so much with stability and pacing, it overshadows the good ideas, and that's why this ends up in the trash tier for me. Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty shows a clearer direction for Night City and its characters. The focus on a spy-driven plot gives the experience a tighter structure, and the new cast, especially the agents caught between loyalty and survival, adds real weight to the decisions I had to make. Exploring Dogtown feels dense and deliberate, with smaller moments often carrying as much importance as major missions. Combined with the improved systems from the 2 update, playing as V now feels more flexible and rewarding than before. Because of its stronger writing, atmosphere, and meaningful choices, this earns a great spot on my tier list. Control stands out because of its strange setting and strong sense of atmosphere, especially inside the shifting halls of the oldest house. Using Jesse's psychic powers was fun at first, and throwing objects around never really stopped being satisfying. However, combat started to feel repetitive over time due to limited enemy variety, and performance issues often broke the flow during busy fights. I also found that Jesse's personal arc didn't hit as hard as the world around her, with the ending leaving things a bit flat. While the environment and ideas are interesting, the overall experience didn't fully come together for me, which is why this sits in the mediocre tier. BioShock Infinite takes me to the floating city of Columbia, a place that looks bright on the surface but hides some very dark ideas underneath. Moving through the city using skylines keeps the action fast, and fights feel more dynamic thanks to powers and open combat spaces. Booker is a flawed lead, and Elizabeth adds real emotional weight through her actions and presence during gameplay. The world tackles heavy themes through its setting and characters, and the ending leaves a lot to think about long after the credits roll. Because of how boldly it builds its world and delivers its payoff, this earns a place in the excellent tier on my list. Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 takes me back into Senua's harsh world and focuses heavily on her inner struggle and raw determination. The visuals are striking, with detailed environments and intense facial work that make every moment feel heavy and personal. Combat is simple but brutal, keeping fights close, tense, and physical rather than flashy. The sound design, especially with headphones, adds constant pressure through whispers and environmental noise, making the journey feel unsettling from start to finish. Even though the gameplay options are streamlined, the presentation and emotional weight carry the experience, and that's why this lands in the excellent tier for me. Disco Elysium. The Final Cut is a deeply written detective RPG where nearly everything happens through dialogue, internal conflict, and choice rather than combat. Playing as an amnesiac cop, I shape the investigation and the character's identity through conversations, skill checks, and arguments with different parts of his own mind. The world of Revachol is dense with political tension, personal tragedy, and dark humor, and the fully voiced cast in the Final Cut strengthens every interaction. With its unmatched writing, original systems, and long-lasting impact, this stands as a masterpiece on my list.